Let's jump back to 1983 in 2016.
I think so.
I'm out of center.
There you
Hello,
are.
welcome
You're
to
back.
the HolmFront. What I've realized is that my camera, when it's just us, when we do a mini episode, I can easily shift over, but when I have to do a cold open, it gets like a wider shot. And so you start to see the background that you're not supposed to see. So I have to shift it when we do these. This is my cold open. So welcome to the HolmFront. I'm Tyler, your host. And to my right, as always, is my overly artistic friend, Mitch. Mitch.
And this was a behind-the-scenes episode. So thank you guys. Next time.
Hello. Welcome. We are actually recording this time. All right. There's nothing worse than getting most of the way into an episode and being like, oh, well, okay. We
and
didn't
then you
record.
don't get to see that little red dot.
Yeah.
And
We
you're
should
like,
have been checking the whole time. Okay, so you don't have any announcement? I should have asked before the show. Okay. I don't either. Anyway, so we watched something recently that we have seen before, and obviously you've seen the thumbnail. What did we watch?
We watched Stranger Things Season 1.
Season 1, baby.
Yeah. So we're going back and we're going to review all of Stranger Things because we really love the show, especially Season 1. And there's going to be a new season coming out later this year, so we'll review that too.
Apparently November. Apparently.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Those are the rumors. I have no idea.
Yeah. But this will be a really engaging episode because we're just going to focus on Season 1. And you're going to have to make a promise with me on this. And that promise is going to be we're not talking about Season 2, 3, or 4. This is just, we're going to give Season 1 its time of day because it was a great season and we want to respect that.
Fine.
But that's not good enough.
So in Season 2...
You need... You need to do a spit swear.
That's disgusting.
Spit swear it up. Come on.
I don't know. You didn't spit in your hand. I'm still grossed out.
You didn't do the spit swear.
I know for a fact. I'll do a pinky swear. How about that? We'll do it on my camera so you can see. You got to... Okay, all right. There. All right. It's sealed. That looks really weird.
That does look weird.
It's so strange. All right. I won't talk about any other seasons except for one.
All right.
Maybe.
So what do you like about Season 1?
Season 1. Okay. This is one of those shows that you watch and it just forever will stick with you.
Yep. And if you've not seen it in a while, go back and rewatch it.
Definitely. Yeah. Just pause this right now and just go watch it.
It's great.
Way more entertaining. Yeah. Okay. So I remember specifically watching it the first time, and you and I didn't know this until today. You and I had the exact same experience with the show. Exactly.
Oh, really?
Yep. I'm sitting there, and I had the Netflix subscription in my house. I was living with my parents at the time. I had the Netflix subscription, so I could do whatever I wanted. And so I was just browsing through, as you do on Netflix.
Mm-hmm. And
I stumbled across this interesting... I was like, oh, that looks neat. It was shortly after it came out, but I was like, oh, why not? I'll dive through it on. And then, end of first episode, I was like, cool, I guess I'm watching this forever and ever and ever. Like, never going to watch anything else after this.
So wait, were you by yourself?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
It was just me.
Yeah. So I watched it with my sister because we were browsing Netflix. And
Okay.
we were just like, nothing. And we were in this state of mind where we just felt like there's nothing original anymore, nothing unique, everything sucks.
Like, hold my beer.
And then, we saw that and we're like, that actually looks kind of vaguely interesting. And we put that on and we're like, whoa, this is engaging. And before we knew it, we were like 5 episodes in.
Yep. Now, the one thing I actually forgot to look up that I wanted to, I don't remember if they released it fully, like if they did the whole season all at once.
They did.
Okay, so this was like one of the beginnings of like the binge era.
So Netflix started this whole thing. They started the Stranger Things started the originals. It started the concept of just binging. I mean, it had been around, but this would like cemented it because you just can't. Like when Stranger Things comes out, just being forced to wait is just unbearable.
Horrible.
I don't know why. For this show, it's so hard.
Yeah, and I think that may have been the case because I don't know what they were thinking of with this show. That's another, like, and this is one of the things we don't get into, so I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I think they shopped it around for a while. And Netflix is just one of those companies that just kind of greenlights everything. They're like, sure, why not? Go ahead. And I don't think they had a huge budget for the first season. But man, the minute that it hit Netflix itself, it became instantly the flagship. Like when you associate Stranger Things, it is associated with Netflix.
Yeah.
Netflix is associated with Stranger Things. Like that is the show. They now have a larger menu of good shows, but that one is like the flagship.
It is. And it reminds me a lot of actually Master Chief for Xbox.
Yeah.
Because they both share like the color green, and in this case it's the color red. So they have a very similar kind of like branding, like I guess like atmosphere to them.
Right.
So there was kind of like that playing into it as well. Because I remember that huge shift of just being like, wow, here's like a truly original show and everybody's loving it.
Yep.
And it was Netflix, and they just like became the greatest thing since sliced bread because of the show. And like you said, they were at the time, it just seemed like they were greenlighting cool, interesting new projects. But really what they were doing was just okaying everything and to see what lands.
Just give me something, yeah.
Right.
Something will get us notoriety here.
That hasn't really panned out for them in the long term, which I do think is an interesting topic because, I've always been a big proponent of just let the creators like try different things. Not everything's going to work, except some things will fail, but that's why you can weed out and find what's good. But Netflix is also a case example where maybe it's okay to every now and then
say no.
Say no.
Say
no
like,
isn't the worst word you could use.
Yeah, it's actually a great word. And it's a complete sentence too. Yeah, and I wonder at some point if potentially A24 will come onto the scene with its own streaming service.
I was about to say that they've basically taken the baton of what
Right.
Netflix and Stranger Things started, and now it's A24 where they do all the unique, original, crazy
Right.
projects. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, it seems like A24 has a larger margin of success, but it appeals to a specific audience. Like it is widening now, but it seems like A24 fans, they just seem like they're a little bit smaller. Like it's a tight conglomerate, whereas Netflix was just something everybody had. So I think A24 is trying to expound its boundaries a little bit more, which makes me wonder if they're going to try and jump onto the scene with like shows and whatever else.
That would be interesting. Because, they're somewhat different spheres because A24 is so much more specific to just movies.
Right.
And they want their movies in theaters and stuff, and they want them winning awards and things like that. That's so much more of a higher priority for them. Yeah. And then actually, it's a funny story because Netflix is now doing that kind of thing because they want like the awards attention now with like Emilia Perez and Marriage Story. But they do these like limited theatrical runs just so that they can, qualify, and then they pull them. Yeah. And that's why Hollywood hates them because they're just like, you're destroying movie theaters.
These aren't the rules. You're supposed to follow the rules.
Well, it's not so much that. It's just like it pisses them off because they're like, as filmmakers, we want our films to play in movie theaters and want people to see it in movie theaters.
Right.
And you are the antithesis of that.
Yep.
This is why like Netflix can never win Best Picture at the Oscars. It just can't.
They won't let them.
Right, because everyone is just like, no, F them. And it's so strange how like Netflix and A24 actually have a reputation that precedes them, whereas a lot of studios like Paramount, it's like whatever. They make movies, I guess.
Well, they've been around for however long, so
right.
These are the new young up-and-comers.
Yeah.
Direct competitor. Okay, so Stranger Things. Let's jump into that. We got off this weird tangent. Excuse me. Okay, so the first question we're going to ask, and I'll throw this to you first, is why do you think that this is so successful?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and I feel like it will just unravel into all sorts of interesting things about the show.
I imagine, we'll probably answer that question over the entirety of the episode, but...
Yeah. So, okay, I have 2 points that I want to start with, and they both have to do with the way they handle the characters. The first is that everybody is spectacularly cast.
Yeah.
The casting's awesome. Everyone's perfect. The kid who plays Dustin is hilarious. Like, he's so funny.
He's like the quintessential comedic relief.
Yeah, he really is. But everyone, even like the side characters, like my favorite character in this show is actually Mike's dad. Because he's just so, like, I didn't even get him the first time. I was like, what is with this character? He's barely in it. He does nothing. And then I got it. I was like, he's just here.
He's like classic 2000s white dad.
Yeah.
The one that's just not quite an idiot, but just completely aloof.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with anything. Like, my favorite scene is where he's sitting at the dinner table. And, like, slowly, one by one, everybody gets up to leave because of various reasons.
Yeah, they're all fighting each other.
And then the wife just gets mad at him at the end. I hope you enjoy your meatloaf. And she gets out. He's like, what did I do? And she walks out of the room. What did I do? But it's, like, almost emotionless. He's just like, well, I'm going to finish my meatloaf, and I guess I'll figure it out later. I got my priorities in line.
Yeah, he's just, like, without a care in the world. And like he has this part where it's just this small thing where the authorities or the evil organization are pounding on his door, and he's like walking in the door, and he's like, "God, Jiminy Christmas."
Is that the one? Is that the one at the end where she's like, "What is going on?" He's like, "I don't know, but it's our government. We gotta trust them."
Yeah, yeah, he says that's it. Like, that's really unfair. These are like all his lines. Yeah. That's it. That's all. You've heard it out.
All the interaction you get. But he's so even keel. There is he doesn't go up. He doesn't go down.
Right. It's just it's flatline the whole show.
He's almost dead.
I love how we spent so much time just talking about the most ancillary character.
Yep.
But that's what I mean about the casting being so good. Is that even ancillary characters, they have a presence and they get in on the fun too. And so they add something meaningful to
Well, they're
the
also
overall
representative of something wider.
That's true.
Like it's not just that they're ancillary, it's that they're speaking to ancillary characters. It's like some of the meta commentary. Anyway, go ahead. So your second point.
Well, the second part of that was that they positioned the characters into 3 different age groups.
Okay.
And that made it appealing to all audiences.
Yeah.
So you've got the middle schoolers, the high schoolers, and the adults. And that was a really lovely structure because it's basically the antithesis of like the Skeleton Crew show where it's like just the kids and then the moron adults have to go on with them, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's so annoying. Whereas in this, like when things get serious, it's serious for everybody, and they all have a different route of getting there. So like the middle schoolers, they're talking about like Mirkwood and like Lando, and they're just making these pop culture references because that's the language that they know. So they're talking about like the Veil of Shadows. That's what the Upside Down is to them. Whereas the adults have a more nuanced perspective and more disbelief because they're like, well, that's ridiculous. But they start investigating the conspiracy. They all kind of converge on the same point, but it is interesting to see how the writing reflects the different concerns of each group. The high schoolers are more concerned about like romance and this kind of stuff, and they're kind of this middle ground. The middle schoolers are just about, gaming stuff, and then the adults are like dealing with like more tragic. They've had more life experience, so they have like heavier things following them.
An interesting contrast that I just remembered is that there's the character of the teacher, the science teacher, and he's kind of the bridge between the two.
Yeah.
Because he's like a super nerd, but he's someone who's applied that to now his living. He's able to teach science to kids. And that's something that connects him because the kids all really love him because he's able to speak to their level, essentially.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that they introduce that is that he gets a ham radio in the beginning. And I think episode 1 or 2. And he announces it to the kids, and they're like, oh man, what is this? Like, I know that this is a cool nerdy thing. I just don't know the extent of it. And they're like, well, where does it talk to? New York? And he's like, no, think bigger. Like California, and he's even bigger. And they're like, Australia. And he's like, yep. And he lets them get on and start talking to whomever around the world. And they don't spend much time on that, but it's their way of connecting how he engages with the kids and how the kids look up to him. So he's the one to whom they go and present this theory. They're like, okay, there's a lot of these things we don't understand that this character L is explaining to us, and we don't know how to get it. They've contextualized it in their own way of understanding, which is the Veil of Shadows. Yeah. But then they bring it up to the science teacher, and then the science teacher contrasts that because he understands the Veil of Shadows. He plays Dungeons and Dragons,
right?
But he applies it into a scientific method, and it helps the rest of the audience understand who might not have that background with Dungeons and Dragons. But it also shows you how it's communicating to both groups.
Yeah.
And it says, okay, here's a way that kids can understand, or people that play Dungeons and Dragons, they're like super nerds that are enjoying the show, but also here's a way that we can basically describe this from an adult to the kids to show you that not only are we trying to help the rest of the audience, but also this appeals to 2 different audiences.
Exactly.
So interesting character, but that's one of the ways that like it is appealing to multiple age groups. And that's the contrast it has with Skeleton Crew, because Skeleton Crew does not care about anyone else except for kids. It's like, no, this is a kids Star Wars show.
Right.
When in
which is like fine, but like that we talk about a lot where it's unnecessary.
Yeah.
Put in the work that Stranger Things did, and you get everyone on board, and it's such a fun like sit down with everybody. Now I will admit that the horror elements go kind of far, so there is like a point at which it's a little tough.
There's a fine-tuning balance that you got to do there.
There is an age group that it does limit, but I don't think that lasts for very long. And I think in part that didn't detract from it too much because they were It's sort of like it released at a time when we have so much media,
Mhm.
and most families or parents have just kind of given up on like filtering for their kids.
Sure.
Not entirely, like they still filter it, especially when they're really young. But I just mean like when they start reaching that middle school age, it's just kind of like, all right, well, we can't keep it back anymore because
Sure.
there's just so much that they get exposed to now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's more like it's they still do filtering when they're a baby, but then it's like you just get launched right away. Whereas
Right.
before it would just be this gradual thing and you progress with everyone else.
Yeah. And so I have a question on that too. What do you think it is? Why do you think it is that they did it this way? Because, like, so going back to the Star Wars example, Star Wars itself appeals to everybody, right? The original one, but that's kids and adults. But it doesn't have kids in it. Whereas, like,
Right.
Skeleton Crew has kids in it, but they limit themselves to just kids as their audience. And then you look at Stranger Things, and Stranger Things kind of has that appeal for all of them, but it has kids and adults in it.
Yeah.
So it has this weird contrast. And I think they're doing that on purpose to appeal to kids, but not necessarily like limiting themselves to it. And Star Wars was made for kids, but at the same time, it doesn't have kids in it. So, like, why do you think that they went the route of having kids in it? Because notoriously in Hollywood, it's so difficult, especially at that age, to find actors that are competent enough to hold not only a narrative but the whole show. Because they do rely on them for the whole show. It's not just that they're in it; it's like they are the ones that are driving it.
They're one of the main plot points that helps us develop. Like they make some discoveries that a lot of the adults don't get to.
Yeah.
Through their own lexicon of Mirkwood
and
ideas.
The other interesting thing about kids, before I throw you the full question, is that, like, when you look at a character like Luke, he's a fish out of water character, so he's able to be explained. Things are able to be explained to him, or to us through him, right? He's our like proxy. Kids are that by their very nature, because they don't understand everything with the maturity that comes with adulthood, and so everything is pretty much explained to them. So, like, you don't have to worry about how exposition-y something gets because you're going to have those kids through whom it's filtering because they're the main characters. That's why you have those moments like with them with the high school teacher or the middle school teacher.
Yeah.
Where they explain this to me in a scientific method. And then he's able to do that in a way that we would understand rather than using a bunch of scientific terms. So it provides that avenue, but why do you think it is that they did that?
Yeah, like why put so much attention on these kids? I just assumed that. Well, I guess I have. Here's how I answer this, and it's going to answer that question and a question you didn't ask that I will answer.
Okay.
So the first is they did it because they're inspired by Spielberg movies, specifically like The Goonies and E.T., in which the kids play a major role in the story. So I think they were just kind of harkening back to that feel. And Spielberg's really good about balancing adults and kids in his movies as well. He does actually an excellent job of that. So I think that's just a style and a type of story that appeals to them. But the thing is that the Duffer Brothers are millennials. So that's where the horror element comes in, because millennials don't like to hold back. They just like to be like, it's this graphic and that's real life. It's ugly.
Just give it to me straight, essentially.
Give it to me straight. Yeah, that's how they are. So I think that's where you see the two kind of converge. And that's why it resonates with everybody, because it connects with millennials and it connects with the past generation because they have millennial kids. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Okay.
And then millennials are going to have some kids of their own. Those are going to be kind of young, so maybe they're not watching until they start to get a little bit older. But that's where that bridge starts to connect. So that's why it works. But that's also why I think the decisions kind of came in. It was just what they're interested in, I think.
Gotcha.
Because I've been thinking of my own stories, for example. Like maybe I'm just projecting too much of my own personality, but as like the epitome of a millennial, like I'm literally born in the year smack dab in the middle of being a millennial. So I can't get away from it no matter how you slice it. You pretty much too, but you're 1 year forward. So you could make this like the smallest bit of an argument.
Extremely slight, but all right. I wonder too if maybe it's a way to appeal, because that's one thing as storytellers, at least within my vein, I'll say.
Okay.
So, and the difference between us, we should make an episode on that actually. Where I tend to lean is like I like to channel like this sounds weird. Like I don't like to think that I've grown up. Right? I like to live with my head in the clouds, just kind of this imaginative, like it's more fun to live in that realm that you've created than
course it
reality
is.
sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And so I wonder if maybe that's another reason they did it, is that it's like this is kind of their way of showing like you're appealing to your inner child because you get to go back into that time. So it's nostalgic by its nature because you're getting to relive this as a kid, as that age. That how that would appeal to you when you were that age in this scenario. So I wonder if that's kind of how they were appealing to it as well.
Yeah.
Because not only does it apply to kids, but it also applies to adults that kind of live in that escapism, right? Getting away from everyday responsibility and living in this adventure, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about that is they set it in the time period of 1983.
Yeah.
So it is set for their childhood, but then it's like the characters are making references to things that they themselves would have been enjoying, like Star Wars and The Thing, and the new movies or whatever was coming out at the time. So they've kind of infused their real childhood with the make believe of those movies.
Right.
Like the monster becomes real in the story for the characters.
Yeah.
So it's this like reality and fantasy just clash, right? So maybe that kind of goes to what you're saying, where it's like you don't want to like let go of it. And if anything, there's like this real effort to like preserve that time.
Yeah.
And preserve it not just for like what it actually looked like, but rather the parts about it that we were so invested in and that inspired so much out of us. That has to play such a predominant role because it was such a huge part of our lives, right?
Yeah, that's interesting because they're formative years, so that's just something that's going to intrinsically stick with you.
Yeah, but I called them millennials earlier because the idea of the millennial artist is just like, that directness of everything. You got to make it real and put your face up in it. That's where like the gratuitous like horror stuff comes in. That's where like some of the fast, speedy editing comes in.
Yeah.
And those elements are, a product of them sort of like existing now beyond that time, if that makes sense. It's like we ingested all that media in that time, but then we didn't realize like how much that was actually like educating our ability to, become like an expert on it in a way. And so
Gotcha.
now when they sit
Right.
down to make their craft, they're like, they can do Spielberg, but they do him like 15 times faster.
Sure.
Like I have actually a good example of this. It's actually pretty early on. It's the scene where we're first introduced to Hopper's character. It starts off with a shot on his. It's a picture that his daughter drew, and we don't know about his daughter yet. But that's a nice, like, subtle hint of that he has a daughter, that he has a child, because he's a mature guy. Why would he keep a piece of art like that around, right? And then it pans around his room, and you get to see like empty beer cans and stuff like that, and then it shows him. Now, this shot is 40 seconds long, and it's very similar to the opening shot in Back to the Future, which does this pan across Doc Brown's workshop. And you see like his clocks, this picture of Einstein, his inventions that like automatically feed the dog, and, all of this stuff. And that was supposed to communicate to us like who Doc Brown is as a character.
Right.
So it's just kind of like, and that shot in Back to the Future is like 2 minutes and 20 seconds or something like that. I timed it before I came over because I was like, that's interesting how similar it is. So like 2 minutes to 20 seconds now to 40 seconds, but they both accomplish pretty much the same thing.
Right.
Right. So it's like there's a real root of something that they've kind of preserved, and then they're like recreated it, and they're like, well, this is my way of interpreting that,
Which is the inspiration thing, right? You can tell what inspired it without it necessarily having to rely on Spielberg existing, essentially, to make them relevant. Yeah, and that, I mean, we should just start there then. So that's an interesting scene also because it tells you all you need to know about Hopper to just get you started.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to get all this backstory and stuff. Because then the next thing, he's like in the shower, smoking a cigarette or whatever, and then he's brushing his teeth, and then when he finishes, he put the cigarette back in his mouth.
Yeah.
And he's like putting deodorant on and stuff, and it's like, man, this guy's extremely self-destructive with all the empty beer cans and stuff.
Finishing the beer,
right? And I thought it was interesting too because he comes out and like he buttons up his shirt, and he's this cop, he's the sheriff of the town, and he's like well put together.
Yeah.
So some semblance of professionalism is still shining through, even though the personal life is just in shambles. Because like he doesn't take any care to to put any of his place together. He lives out in seclusion. He's all by himself, and he's like, I think he's standing out on his balcony at first or whatever to like look out over this land, and it's just very lonely and secluded. Doesn't want anybody in there. And he's got the empty building. He's got like the news playing in the background, and he leaves and then just leaves the TV on. He just doesn't care. He just like, there's nothing in there that's like prioritized. He's like, I just got to go to work, and just very mechanical. And so he goes to work, and then he has these fun exchanges with his coworkers. One of which I just always stuck with me is the administrative assistant or secretary, whatever she is. She comes through and is like trying to give him all the updates of the day, and she's like, I don't know what kept you in so late, but X person called in for the cat stuck in a tree, and Joyce Byers called in for something, and she's like trying to convey this, and he's like, Flo, it's Monday, it's early in the morning. This is for coffee and contemplation.
Yeah,
and
mornings are for coffee and contemplation.
And she's like, well, hold on. They're saying, he's like, coffee and contemplation, Flo. And then comes in and meets Joyce Byers, who now believes that her son has gone missing.
Right.
And that jumps into the narrative. So it's this interesting contrast of like how they handle humor while the serious events are going on. And it's more akin to the prior, I would go back to George Lucas, how he has comedic relief in his films, because he's got the droids, which are able to allow that door to be open without damaging the seriousness of the narrative. You have something similar in this show where you have the kids who provide plenty of avenues of humor without stopping the narrative like Marvel does, and just like, hold on, we got a joke. And like it's moments like these too, where it's like an everyday work day for him.
Yeah.
He's just showing up late after smoking a bunch of cigarettes and drinking a bunch of beer in his shower. And he's just like, it's Monday and nothing ever happens in this town, but also I don't want it to happen because I don't want the responsibility that comes with it. And then he's faced with this responsibility that comes and smacks him. Is like, well, all right. And then as the story progresses, he faces reality. But
that's a good point about the humor, actually. I think that's another reason why it succeeds, and also why it endures and why it's worth going back to review it. Because the humor, the humor comes from the characters expressing like their worldview.
Yes.
That's why it's there. So when he's talking about coffee and contemplation, he's not doing that because the scriptwriter thought it would be funny. He's doing that because that's genuinely how he wants his morning to be. Everybody to stay calm. Thing. Yeah, it's Hopper. Hopper's like, look, you guys, because he's from the city. He's had like bigger cases before. Yeah. And he's like, nothing happens in this small town. And we find that out later where he talks about how he's like, there's just nothing going on. So, you're being dramatic, but I know just from been here long enough that it's not going to be that big a deal. It just won't be. I can count on that. So I'll just send you back to coffee and contemplation.
Yeah, I have this anecdotal yet, to me, empirical evidence that I'm not going to care that much.
Right.
It's not going to be that important. But the other scene that I think of in that vein is when he sits the kids down, because after Joyce makes the report, he goes and grabs the kids and he sits them down and he says, okay, explain to me what happened the other night when Will goes missing. And they're like, well, we took Mirkwood home. And he's like, what is Mirkwood? And Mirkwood, for those of you that don't know, is a road in The Hobbit that is fraught with danger. And that,
well, Lord of the Rings,
The Hobbit. So that's another interesting kind of like even more meta point is that, and they do a bunch of these type of things where I remember you were mentioning the Andor example where when he gets back in the game, he picks up the cereal and chucks it back into the bowl.
Yeah,
kind of that where they mentioned that this road is Mirkwood. Which in the story of The Hobbit is that this road is filled with spiders and such, and it's like this is a dangerous road. In fact, the warning on the road is do not leave the road. That's what Gandalf says before he rides off. Do not leave the road for anything or any reason. You will get lost and you will never be found again. Well, when they go on Mirkwood, that's where Will encounters this thing, and eventually goes missing. And it's when he leaves the road. And so it's kind of like this extra commentary for those that like are nerdy enough to have known that. But it's also like these kids are communicating this to Hopper in a way that they understand, like you were saying, in their worldview.
Right.
We have named this road because it doesn't have a name. We've named it by something that we associate it with.
Right.
And it's this, and that's where the humor also comes in, because like, where was it? It's like, it's Mirkwood. He's like, what is Mirkwood? He's like, well, they're like, that's from Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit.
Yeah, and then they're
And
picking
then,
at each other, getting in
yeah,
a
they
fight
fight each other for
because
what it's from.
it
Like,
doesn't matter. It's like,
it
"But
does. He
yes."
asked. And then he's getting mad because they're arguing about it when
Something
it's
that
not
doesn't matter.
important.
Right. Well, that's the thing too, is that it's not insulting to anybody in the room. It's not insulting to the adults in the audience, because Hopper's reaction is, "Oh, they're just fighting. That's so annoying." Because I just want to get to the root of the actual problem.
Right.
And so many adults are going to have that perception, like these are just kids bickering about something that doesn't matter. The story doesn't feel the need to say like, well, their interpretation is the only interpretation that matters, right? It's like
It's
Mirkwood,
that contrast.
right? Exactly. But then again, it doesn't actually devalue how the kids see it at all, because like you said, the fact that it's called Mirkwood is apropos because of how the story plays out. So if you know Mirkwood, that is actually a valid lens through
Right.
which to read this situation. It's just strange because you wouldn't think that that would be a useful, analogy. The other one that I really like too is like when 11 takes the wizard little gaming piece from their Dungeons and Dragons, and then she takes the dungeon board that they have and she flips it upside down, and it's just black. It's like, hardened cardboard or whatever. And then she puts well there, and she's like, that's where he is. And they're like, well, I don't understand. How does that make any sense? But it's a perfect analogy of like, well, okay, the game board, we're interacting with it in this way, but on another plane of existence, it would just be completely, devoid of anything else that we would understand. And when they depict like elements of the upside down, or perhaps that middle space where it's like that black abyss, it's a black abyss. And so it was like, taking something that you could intuit and apply to something else, and it does make sense. It does add up once you start going through the pieces of it just visually. And I thought that was really cool with it too.
Yeah. Well, it's the visual medium, right? So they're using
exactly
using it appropriately. Okay.
Yeah.
So then all those elements, let's jump into, you said it's appealing. Let's jump into the nostalgia portion of it. So I had a question on this show.
Okay.
Why do you think, because we didn't grow up in the 80s, and most of the group, like most of the people that it appeals to probably didn't either. So why do you think?
Well, yeah, because it's really popular with younger audiences,
Right.
like teenagers actually really like the show.
So why do you think it appeals in a nostalgic way to those of us who did not grow up in that time?
I feel like I have a dumber answer to this than you're going to have. So I'll do a brief one while you come up with an answer to your own question.
Oh, okay, sure.
Because my thinking is just that we hadn't quite left it yet, right? So you and I watched Star Wars and E.T. and Back to the Future, and we absorbed that stuff from the 80s because we weren't inundated with media in the 90s.
Yeah.
But now it's like the year 2020. So like, or when it came out in 2016, it's like now you're just inundated with constant stuff.
Yeah.
It's just like everything's vying for your attention. And your senses just get
Dulled.
dulled. You just get overworked. So for us, this stuff, the 80s stuff, is nostalgic because we didn't have so much to filter through. So we were still kind of like collecting and savoring and enjoying the things from the recent time period. And then I think nowadays why it appeals to a younger audience is they're so inundated that it's got to be really gripping to like capture your attention. And, they talk about how like, oh, like attention spans are so short. I'm like, kind of, but it's also just, they're so well acclimated to media that they filter it quicker.
Sure.
And so if Stranger Things sticks out to them because it's actually kind of new and fresh, because it's going back to that original time and pulling on a bunch of different sources, many of which you wouldn't think to put together, it does. And so that makes it kind of a unique flavor. And so I think that kind of pulls them along too.
Okay.
That's my best guess. But what do you think? Why is this stuff nostalgic for us?
Well, I think my answer would probably be very similar to yours in that it calls back to a time before the inundation where it's probably something most people would wish that they had experienced if they hadn't experienced it. Like most people are going to like, to some extent, you're going to have some of these elements. And I think that's another reason why it just kind of transcends culture in a way, because it speaks to the human condition, is that it's like, yeah, well, when you're a kid, these are the adventures you had, at least for most of our generation. I mean, probably not so much anymore, but going out on your bike, going to your friend's house during, to escape homework or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
just trying to find some kind of fun in the midst of responsibilities or
Yeah.
boredom. I mean, I remember when I was that age, like especially during summertime, it was really hard to go anywhere because I was a kid. My mom didn't just trust me to go out and be on my own.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
so it's very difficult. So like those type of adventures, what you look forward to is like, oh, how can I get out of the house and go do something, and go somewhere, experience something. And so to put not only that feeling, which is embodied before they have any of the spectacular events of the story happen, but then the spectacular portions speak to what you wish happened in those adventures, right? It's like, oh, I wish I had some kind of extraordinary thing that happened today or adventure. And so it's interesting to like bring life to that because it speaks to the imagination that you probably grew up with, even if you didn't have the same experience. And so, in my opinion, that's probably why. But also, yes, it was something unique. It was something different that not only pulled from things that we probably all would know, but gave it that light that spoke to a more modern audience and was interesting because of that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One correction I should probably make too is I don't know that we have more media. I mean, we definitely have more media now than I think before, but not profoundly so, because there was a lot of crap media that was made
Of course.
over the last handful of decades as well. And I'm always watching it because it's on Mystery Science Theater. They just review it. So there were tons of horrible
Call out to
movies.
Mystery Science Theater. Like, if you haven't
My
seen
favorite
it,
show ever.
you should absolutely watch it.
We'll have to review that someday.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing there is that it's a lot less accessible than it is now. Now, I mean, you have your phone in your pocket, which will just give you access to everything.
Yeah.
And there's no filter whatsoever. So it's just kind of, there's this.
It's almost overwhelming.
Yeah. So it kind of is like a lot of the more recent films that have been trying to do this like meta commentary, like Everything Everywhere All at Once. That was the movie that really wanted to get at that specific issue. And that movie too feels like it's very much in line with like a Stranger Things. Like, it'd be interesting to see someone like write an essay, do an analysis, like comparing the two, because I think they actually share a lot of like similarities in terms of that, like generational conflicts, and then, making real the fantasy and having that actually be a part of our lives because it was just so real to us, right? If you were an 80s kid, this stuff was real.
Right.
Darth Vader was real.
He was.
Space aliens did come to the Earth.
That was earlier. That was in the 60s, but sure. We'll go with that.
Yeah. I don't know if I can kind of expand on that too much more beyond that, just because I didn't write the essay, but it just kind of occurs to me as like another piece that is wanting to be like, we got to talk about that, and a lot of like media that's been made recently that's doing that conversation is very well received, because even like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that kind of has that going on as well, where there's this whole scene where you see them shoot a movie, so it has to do that meta thing, and then you see like the character like getting ready for I gotta get in character or whatever. It's a funny scene, but also it's like, well, we've got to pull back all the veils of the fantasy, because before it was just like, here's the fantasy, here's Star Wars, the fantasy,
right?
And then nowadays it's like, well, here's Star Wars, but it's really just real life. But then they go into fantasy. And the funny thing about that is that totally doesn't land for a lot of us, like us in particular. We hated that because it was like, wait a minute, that was what that fantasy was supposed to be. And now you're trying to say that it's real. And it was strange how that one doesn't work, but like Stranger Things does.
Well, because it removes the escapism. Well, I think that would be another point I would make for Stranger Things, is that it kind of went back to that as well. It was like, no, we're just going to focus on the escapism. You might get some stuff out of this, but it's not trying to give you some kind of meta commentary. It's just saying, no, this is just the adventure of our imagination. Enjoy it with us. Like, it was just kind of like, just jump in and just enjoy the show.
It does create its own unique fantasy as a result of using the meta information, because it's not so determined to be exactly like Spielberg.
Right.
You know what I mean? It wants to pull on those ideas, but then it's got like, Elle, who's just like, something out of Akira, the anime. So it's like, and where they torture kids to get like psychic powers out of them or whatever.
Well, how else do you do it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a lot less unhinged, but it's the same basic idea. So, when they're pulling on those different sources of inspiration, they create this new fantasy that's birthed as a result.
Well, speaking of which, should we review our scene from the show that we?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to talk about the filmmaking aspects.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, I'm gonna teeter on that promise I made us make earlier. Some of the
made me make it. I don't think you made it, so
this
I just have to keep
free.
my mouth shut at this point.
Okay, well I'll
you can
embrace
go all
that.
you want.
That logic works for me.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I don't really like season 2 or 3. But I'm gonna rewatch
Spoilers.
I'm gonna rewatch them and pay very close attention because it was a long time. I just saw them at release and I only saw them the one time. So, they're worth a revisit, I think. But when I went through this first season again, I really wanted to pay attention to like the filmmaking because I'm like, I know I really like this, but a part of it is just like appeals to me aesthetically, like on every level. So I'm like, does it actually work from a filmmaking perspective? And I started unpacking some scenes, and I think I got a good one that points out how the editing is good, the directing is good, and the writing is good. So we're going to do a cool version where we actually get to see it happen.
Okay. I'm going to jump into my weird producer mode here.
Yeah, you be producer for me now.
All right, so I'm going to get real close. Hi, guys.
Okay, so this is going to be a little awkward.
Because I don't want to go by myself.
Okay.
We start with this shot here. This
Barb,
is
it's not
episode
rocket
2.
science.
I don't
just
like
tell your
that
parents
cut
you're
right
gonna stay in
there.
my
I
place
think the camera
afterwards.
should have just followed her because it's an instance
I'm
where
going to back it up.
yeah, it's an
Okay.
instance where
Start there.
we're starting here. She's in full frame. You can just go ahead and hit play.
Okay.
When she rises up, they want it to be snappy, and that's more modern
Barb,
editing. If it was
Barb,
old school,
it's
it
not
probably would have
rocket
just
science.
followed her and then
You just tell your
panned
parents you're
around
gonna
to
stay
put
in
her
my
in
place.
frame. And
Which would have fit this style a little bit more anyway.
Mhm.
Because regardless of how snappy it is, it would have been more smooth, I suppose.
Yeah.
Transitioning into this. But whatever. I mean, that's a minor point.
But yeah, but I did want to point it out because it's like the editing can work for it, but it can also just be a noticeable, like, I was like, that's a weird jarring. I don't really need that. But it's like, here's back into the full, I got the character up front and close, so you're not really bothered by it.
Right.
You get what you want to see anyways, so you don't care that there was a cut. Okay, you can hit play again.
Okay.
So that was like a minor critique, but not really a critique, but mostly just
tell them
pointing
we're
out the kind of style of
studying.
editing. But it's this next scene that I think is
Coming!
really, really good. So she
Okay, I
has
gotta
this
go. I'll see you in an
conversation.
hour.
Then we get a short insert where she puts the phone down. And now we see an establishing shot. We see the whole family. And
We get to see that he's there. The dad is in this shot.
yeah, so my favorite character, the dad, is here.
He's on the
Funnily
right.
enough, as we go through this scene, there is not one single mid shot or close up of him. And he doesn't say a word in this whole conversation. So I didn't even know he was there. When the scene resolved the first time, I thought he wasn't there. And then when I rewatched it for our episode, I'm like, wait a minute, he's here.
He is,
Never
yep.
see him.
They'll let you know right there. There he is. Okay, so with that in mind, let's
Okay.
move forward.
And the reason why that's so interesting is that we get reaction shots on everybody but him. So this is a good establishing shot of the mom. You could just leave it. You don't need to edit it so much.
Something
and
wrong
this
with
is
meatloaf?
her actually at the head of the
Oh
table.
no, I had
And
2
she's
bologna
addressing what's going on.
sandwiches
And I
for
love how the
lunch.
kids are so much smaller. They're just like
I don't know
shrunken down by comparison.
Me too.
So she is the one who's
It's
carrying more
delicious,
power at the
Mommy.
table.
Thank you, sweetie.
And then we're switching to
So,
a more
there's
intimate
this
conversation between
special
Nancy
assembly thing
and
tonight
mom. So
for
then it
Will
switches
at
to
the
an
school
over-the-shoulder shot, which is good.
Barb's driving.
But you'll
Why
notice
am I
Right.
you
just
can see
hearing
the
about
staircase in the background. And we can
I
see
thought you
more of the
knew.
staircase from
I
this angle
told
than we
you
can
I
the
don't
other.
want
And
you
that'll be
out after
important for
dark
later in
until
the
Will
season.
is
So
home.
it's
I know,
not
but it'd
just
be super
there
weird if I'm not
arbitrarily,
there.
which is
Right.
good.
I mean,
I actually
everyone's
noticed
going.
when you were showing me this, they show L pretty early here.
Just
so it's not here.
Be back by 10.
Mhm.
But obviously, so
Pause it
Why
here.
don't you take the boys too?
No.
Yeah, back up a little bit. Okay, what were you saying?
okay, so now you see the contrast of the staircase.
Mhm.
So now it is reestablished, like you were saying, back to this head of the table view, not the intimate view with
Yeah,
Nancy.
and that's good because now she addresses the boys and she's bringing them back into the conversation. So the fact that it switched from the different angle, I just thought was a nice touch because it was a way to gently transition us out from that intimate conversation she was having with Nancy. But they're both working on double levels or multiple levels because of that staircase. Okay, you can hit play.
No.
Okay, so they don't want to go. They're upset.
Don't you think you
And
should
then
be
this
there?
is when Elle starts
For
to come
Will?
down and we see her
Yep.
in the background.
Sorry. Spasm.
spasm.
They showed the dad again. He was just looking at Dustin. Okay, so those are the only two
It's
scenes we
okay,
get
Allie.
to
It's
see
just a
the
loud
dad.
noise.
But I thought how nice that was just organizationally. It's like, because here's the other thing too. The directing is good because they put the mom at the head of the table. So she's in charge and she's actually interacting with everybody. And she's also the one oblivious to what's going on in her own home. So the layers of that work really well.
Right.
But then the editing was good. We got to see everybody's reaction shots. But then the writing was good because I was thinking about it and I go, wait a minute. Why is Elle upstairs? Shouldn't she be downstairs? That's where they were keeping her. And then I remembered the last time we saw her, she was upstairs because Mike was showing her his room. And that's where she sees the picture of Will. She identifies him. And that makes sense because that picture wouldn't be downstairs because, that's his like gaming room. But up in his bedroom, that's when his mom would like get a picture of him and his friends and put it in his bedroom. So the picture needs to be there. So therefore, Elle needs to be brought up there. It makes sense he'd want to introduce her to his home. So he's going to show her his room. And then when she identifies Elle, or when she identifies Will, his family comes home. And so he doesn't have a chance to put her back downstairs and keep her hidden. So he just hides her in the closet in his room. And then he brings over his friends, and then they have that conversation upstairs. So Ella's just trapped up there, and they're having dinner. And then she gets bored and is like, whatever, I guess I'm just heading downstairs now. And then that's when they freak out. So it made for a funny scene. But if you were just, kind of a layperson, you might be like, oh, well, like, that's weird. Like, why was she up there? But it's like the script knew, like, well, she's still up there. I need to bring her back downstairs. Now, I could just do this off camera, just with the passage of time. But I thought it was clever that they were like, no, you remember she was upstairs, right? And then the viewer goes, oh, yeah, that's right. She was trapped up there, So it's we talk about the writing so much of like what's happening on screen, but also like the writing, the script needs to be aware of what's not, you know what I mean? What's just there as a result of memory.
Okay, so two things on that.
Okay.
First one, through the first season, the script is really tight.
Yes.
There's not an ounce of fat in here. As an example, this does two things. For one, Mike stays home from school, and he stays home because he's sad about Will.
Yeah.
But while he's at home, this is his chance to kind of get to know Elle a little bit more, because she will not allow him to get any kind of help. So they don't know what they're kind of locked into this stalemate. They're like, well, we don't know what to do with her, but so we can't kick her out into the cold. And she's saying we can't call the authorities. We also definitely can't tell our mom because we weren't supposed to be out when we found her in the first place.
Right.
So she's they're like in this limbo stage. And so he stays home with the excuse that like, well, I'm not feeling good and I just want to like process everything that's going on. But during the time that he's home alone, he's able to show Elle around and so that accomplishes multiple things. The first one, you get to know Mike a little bit more because in him showing Elle all these things that are interesting to him, we get to see. The other thing is this allows for the moment when the mom does come home, he pushes Elle into the closet. Now that gives an opportunity to the filmmakers to now show something about Elle. Because Elle has a fear of going in behind closed doors. And they introduced that the first time when she has to change. But they don't know why.
Right.
But then she's forced into this situation where she has to get into this closet to hide so that the mom doesn't find her. And then that introduces this flashback, which, whatever you think of flashbacks, this one is actually well done because it shows you why she's having this hard time.
Right.
And it gives you a little bit of insight into where she came from.
And then that goes to explain why she was being weird about the door before, which could otherwise be interpreted as, well, this character's just weird. Now we start to see that context, and so we're more sympathetic to the character.
It also gives you more of a context because at first you see that she is apprehensive about getting help from Benny, who is the owner of this diner that she goes into to eat. And he's this really nice guy. He calls the authorities. The authorities come in and kill him, and they chase after her. So we understand why she's afraid of authorities. But now we get the context of how that plays into her fear of the closet as well. Is that not only has she got some kind of PTSD, but also, well, I don't want to bring any help in from the outside because that's just going to happen to you guys. So she's just kind of forced into this corner where it's like nothing's really going to, there's no solution.
Yeah.
We're stuck. So the second thing that all this does is that for those of you that, understand what has inspired this property, this calls back to, experience two things. The first one is E.T. So E.T. has this whole sequence almost shot for shot where Elliot is trying to hide E.T. from his mom. And he's got like this comedic performance going on, and it also has the little girl as Gertrude, which I think it's Ellie in this show.
No, Holly, I think.
Is it Holly?
I think
Holly.
so.
And Holly sees E.T., but can't communicate that appropriately to the mother.
Oh, you're talking about in E.T. Okay, in E.T. Yeah, it's
That's
like
Gertrude. I'm sorry. So Gertrude sees E.T.,
okay, yes,
but is not able to communicate that to the mother because the mother's a little bit aloof. And
Right.
here, Holly's just unable to communicate at all, but she does see Elle, and
Yeah.
she's like terrified. She's like, something is in our house, and I don't know what it is. But it's the same thing in E.T. because Gertrude sees him, and Elliot's like trying to hide,
yeah,
like put objects in the way and like keep the fridge open or whatever. But then he comes out and smacks into the door or whatever. So like this whole scenario, it sets up for like a really comedic performance, but it also sets up the like contrast between the aloofness of adults, but also like the kid trying to, maintain the secrecy. And it does the same thing here where Dustin like slams the table in order to get everyone's attention and divert it away from this.
spasm.
Exactly. But the second thing it harkens back to, which I don't know if this is inspiration or not, but it's the Iron Giant. Iron Giant has something similar where the main character in that, Hogarth, he encounters this Iron Giant, this robot that is, I don't know, like 3 or 4 stories tall. So like it provides a more difficult problem, right? Like how do you hide a robot that size?
Yeah.
He gets hit by a train and it just dismembers him. He gets just blown to pieces. And he puts himself mostly back together except for this hand. Cannot find this hand. This hand comes crawling back to the house, and Hogarth sees it while he's talking to his mom over dinner. And it's just the mom and him. And there's no father present, but the government agent is there looking for it. And so he's like, I got to get this hand out of here. And so he's like the whole antics of him trying to conceal this hand from his mother and this government agent to get it back to the barn and give it back to Iron Giant kind of harkens back to this. So it's like this trope that's created itself over this time.
I see. Yeah.
Based on Spielberg's original interpretation. Now, I don't know if he got it from somewhere or not, but
Well,
but it's an interesting thing that harkens back to things that we grew up with, right?
But it's also just, it is good comedy.
It is.
Like, it is good writing, and that stands the test of time, which is,
right.
it's always, it's going to work regardless.
Yeah, and the interesting thing here is that it is integral to Elle's character because Elle doesn't know how to interact with people. She's just lived in this laboratory essentially.
Right.
So to her, she doesn't really understand the importance of keeping herself concealed, but also she doesn't want to sit up there and do nothing. She's got this wide open world open to her now.
Right.
She's escaped the laboratory, so why would she just sit upstairs when she could go explore? But if the mom sees her, then automatically authorities are called, and Mike gets in trouble. And so to them, they're just trying to stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
And so it's just, anyway, like I said, it's like devoid of fat. Like all these things that work together to tell this narrative that provide these avenues for comedy, for character development, for all these other dynamics within the family without having to like conjure them up. It's given the opportunity and it uses them.
They happen so organically. And
right.
I think that's the other kind of point that harkens back to like, why was it so successful? And that's because it was very realistic at the end of the day. Like and by realistic, I just mean that it feels like a lived in, breathed in world.
Right.
So like there's this one part where Mike gets on his bike and he's sneaking out at night so he can go look for his friend Will. And as he's leaving, he passes around the house and he sees Steve trying to climb up on the roof to get into Nancy's bedroom
room.
so they can study, so it's like teenagers, doing teenager things.
But also he's a little brother, so he doesn't care that much.
Right,
He's
so he
just
doesn't care
annoyed
that
at
much.
it.
Yeah, so he's just like, oh, whatever, and then he just keeps going. But that was a great moment, not just because it's funny. It's funny because it makes sense. The characters have separate lives that they're all trying to pursue, their own motivations. They just happen to intersect at that one point.
Well, that's established earlier, too, because when they finish their Dungeons & Dragons game, Dustin tries to give Nancy a piece of pizza that's left over.
Yeah.
Because he's just being nice.
Yeah.
And obviously he probably has a crush or something. And she slams the door in his face. And so he goes out and he's like, something's wrong with your sister. And he's like, that's how she always is. What are you talking about? It's to him, it's just like,
Yeah.
she just sucks. Like, I don't,
she's always
I
been
don't
that
like
way.
it. I don't
He's
like her.
No, she used to be cool. Remember that one time she dressed up as an elf for our campaign or whatever?
We were like 5 or whatever. Yeah,
That was like 3 years ago.
But these are like
just saying.
These are organic conversations. These are conversations you probably relate to on some level.
Right.
Like, who hasn't had an argument like that with their sibling if you have one?
Right.
Like,
exactly.
it's something that you can understand, even if maybe you haven't had that conversation with your sister or whatever, but you can understand how that would happen.
Right.
It's like, oh, she's just being an idiot again. She's inviting some random dude up into her room. Like,
yeah.
But to him, it's just like, I got more important. I got to go find my friend. So
right.
He doesn't have to tell, but he's got that ammo, like, in case he might bring that up at some point.
Well, the funny thing about that is, like, it all works like on a symbolic or at least a visual level, right? Because I mean, he's offering her this last slice of pizza.
Yeah.
Because to his world that's a very valuable thing to offer somebody, a slice of pizza.
You don't understand what this means.
This is a gesture
this
of
is
really
basically
good
an
faith.
engagement ring right here.
He's making a gesture of, like, party relations.
Yeah.
And she's
part of the
looking at
group.
that like, I don't want a piece of friggin' pizza.
It's cold by now.
Right.
It's been touched by all of you
By
guys.
a bunch of snot-nosed kids, right?
Exactly.
So what she does is she goes up and just slams the door in his face or closes the door in his face, and he's like got that goofy grin as it just closes in. So it's like visual humor comedy, but also that's showcasing, like, hey, she's a little bit older, a little bit more mature, but that's going to come with some complexities.
Yeah.
So she's in high school now, so she just closes the door on that stage of her life, right? And then they mentioned that used to be a thing, but it's no longer the case.
Well, it also represented what most of us were like at that age. Specifically, like when that 16, 17-year-old teenager, she's just sitting there on her bed with some random pop song playing, and she's on her phone.
Yeah,
she's just sitting there like talking to Barbara or whatever. And then he has to interrupt her conversation, get off the phone to go tell this kid to get out of her life
because she doesn't have any privacy.
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. And he's just, well, I mean, this is the other thing too. I think it works is that the kids are really lovable because they're actually like nice, good kids,
right?
And so like it's a well-meaning gesture. He's just offering her some food to be nice.
Right.
It doesn't work at all, but that's how he interprets it, right?
Yeah.
He's a good kid. And that goes in spite of the fact that they swear profusely. They're just constantly swearing in this show. But it comes across well because there's adults telling them, like, hey, like, watch your language. And they're like, oh yeah, we got to watch that or whatever. But, it's that bridge between, like, adults are saying, hey, here's the standard. You guys need to be living up to that.
Right.
But in the world of kids, when you're just interacting with each other, it's like, whatever. We say whatever we want.
Right.
And it's not a big deal because we're in good company or whatever. So it was just it's refreshing to see because I think there's a lot of times where they will throw kids in and they will just make them so dumb or so juvenile, or they'll do the opposite and they try to like
smart and the parents are just retarded.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I can't believe in this. And it's like, why are these all caricatures? It's just ridiculous. And here they have caricature-esque people, but they're not the focal point.
They're
like
also
Mike
not the
said.
rule. They're the exception. Yeah.
Right. And they're also there as the interpretation of our main characters. So like the way Mike and Nancy see Mike's dad or their dad that's how he kind of is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there is more depth there, I'm sure, but like not much more. So we don't really need to worry about it because let's be real.
Well, there's the moments where the seriousness comes in. It always involves an adult that's able to deal with the situation more appropriately. Case in point is Nancy's mom. When she's come face to face with the fact that Nancy has probably slept with this boy, she offers kind of a piecemeal. She's like, "Hey, I've probably been there. It's better if you like let me in." But she doesn't come. She at first comes into it as a parent and is like, "What happened? Why are you wearing this sweatshirt?" Or whatever. But then once reality starts to set in, once Nancy has to go in and explain that something happened to Barb during this time where like truth has to come out, she then has to face her mother with like, something happened. But then the mom takes that information and like almost applies it to herself and is like, what would I have been like in this situation? What would I have appreciated from someone if I were to face someone like this? Like if I had to go to my mom, what would I have appreciated?
Yeah.
It's probably a safer place to explain that. Like, yeah, we all make mistakes. Like there's consequences of those mistakes, and it's probably a situation you should have avoided. But also, like, I want you to be able to come and talk to me about this stuff. I don't want you to hide it up because that's just going to make things worse.
Yeah.
Or it's going to make you do something stupid
Mm-hmm.
or more stupid, I should say. But so it was interesting to show that, like, yeah, adults aren't all just these bad, evil rule makers and enforcers. Like, they're also human, and like they're going to be able to relate to you on a level you may not believe that they can.
Mm-hmm.
But they will come into your aid. Like, she's still your mom. And she was still your age at one point too, and so it's important to make sure you maintain those relationships, and how they can help each other. Like, a maturity and the childlike behavior can mesh and be able to help each other grow.
Mm-hmm.
Like the child can bring the adult back down to like re-experience that wonder and imagination and that fun, the loving of life. Whereas the adult can introduce some maturity and say, no, it's okay. Yeah, those are all good things, but also, like, at some point you have to come to grips with reality, something that exists still.
Yeah. See, I kind of wish there was a little bit more from that specific, like, maybe not that scene, but it was the kind of thing where I was like, oh, I want to see more of this develop. And I think they do try in the future seasons. I don't remember how successful it was.
Stay tuned.
But, yeah. But I do remember that as being like a refreshing moment. Like, for example, there's two instances where both Nancy and Mike are just kind of like breaking down in tears when they get home, because they're starting to really accept the fact that I may have just lost my friend. He could be like gone, or that could be like just the end for sure. And when that reality is hitting them, because like in Nancy's perspective, she's like, yeah, I know what I was doing wasn't like kosher. I was breaking the rules a little bit, but it was like I was doing like a white lie thing. I was doing like this. I was just teetering. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal. And I kept saying that. And then now my friend is just gone, and I'm having trouble getting her back. And it's like my world is being destroyed because I was breaching that line a little bit there. And I don't know how to cope with that. And that's so hurtful, because it's like, if I had known that was the case, I wouldn't have done that. You know what I mean? And so that seemed like more what she was like processing. Whereas like Mike is just in total disbelief, right? He's just like, no, Will's alive, Will's alive, Will's alive. And then when his body is revealed, he's just like, wait a minute. Like, you lied. You said we could get Will. You said he was all right, and we were going to find him. And then that didn't happen. And then he just storms off, and just like, he can't even process, because he doesn't even care about concealing Elle anymore. He doesn't even care about his friends. He just leaves them off on their own. And he goes home, and he's just burst into tears, because he's just like, where's Will? Like, I'm not going to see him again, And so it's like having to like really accept these really horrific things. And I think that's partly also what makes it like resonate just so emotionally strong, because it's like those hard things that you have to endure in life, they really shape who you are as a person. And that happens to a lot of characters in this show, or it's already happened to them, as in the case of Hopper. Like, he's already lost his daughter, so he went through something horrible.
Yeah.
And, we're kind of picking up the pieces as to what happened, but he's like this man who's been forgotten about, and he's lived the life that many of these younger people are going through as well. So it became this universal message about like just coping with, the horror realities of life.
Well, also relying on each other. When you're talking about this, it actually brought up an interesting comparison, because I hadn't actually made that correlation, but now that you're talking about it, so Will goes missing, and it's just a Will thing.
Yeah.
But Barbara goes missing, and that's almost, you could say, indirectly related to Nancy's choices, because Nancy convinces her to go out with her, to come to this party, and then she convinces her to pop this beer can open and
with a knife,
and she's the one that makes her cut herself,
which then attracts the monster, which is what gets her.
Right, but also Barb is sticking around because she's concerned about her friend and the choices she's making, and because she sticks around is why she gets taken. So now Nancy, being older, I don't know which direction this goes, but narratively, she's now understanding as an older person, as someone who's coming closer into adulthood, that her actions have these consequences, and so she puts a lot of the blame on herself. But it's almost it's a view on life of like, as you get older and realize the consequences of your actions, they're a little bit more impactful.
Yeah.
Right? Because you are starting to take on like how this happened. You're starting to be able to analyze that more critically. Whereas someone who's more Mike's age is just realized that something horrible has happened and doesn't quite know how to contextualize that within the context of the world. He just knows that something terrible has happened and how it affects him. but he's also
Yeah.
got that innocent determination to like do something about it.
Yeah.
Right. And like Nancy to some extent also has that, but she also has the ability to put that into more of a realistic sense of seeing it. Like, oh, this is probably a little more serious than I'm able to comprehend right now. I'm
Right.
looking for my friend, but I also know that it's probably something bad has happened to her. Whereas Mike is like, something bad's happened, but we can do something about it. Right? It's that like, it's that
we can do something.
It's the idealism that's like, I don't care what it is, let's just go do it.
Yeah.
But when he's faced with the reality, like it just crumples his whole world.
It also might be potentially a comment on like male and female ways of dealing with things.
Potentially, yeah. But it's an interesting contrast between the ages as well.
Yeah.
And then, but also outside of that, with their mom being able to comfort both of them in different ways, because she's the one that Mike runs to, and she just kind of holds him and doesn't say anything. But also, it does the same thing with Nancy. Is that Nancy comes clean. And she does the same thing. She just embraces them. So it doesn't matter how they, what they've gone through. She's able to give that kind of comfort. Same thing with Hopper is that he's going through probably this whole thing again of losing his daughter, seeing someone having lost their son and having a little bit of hope, but probably realizing like this is going to end badly. And I know what that road is like.
Yeah.
Because he has to go and talk to Joyce about that. And is like, hey, at some point you're going to have to come with this reality. Like, your brain's going to try and function in this way. It's going to try and make you think that he's still alive or still around, but he's not. And you're going to have to cope with that reality. And like, it's a really rough road, but it's a road you can make it. And so there's all these ways that like other characters have a solution for. And so you get to grow, but you also get to see that not the end result necessarily, but how to cope or how to deal or how to mature through those situations. So in that way, it speaks to a broader human condition in levels with those different age groups.
Something you're talking about in there that I think is also interesting about this show is that it does have this commentary about a person's perception of reality as being real or imagined or the credibility therein. Because Joyce, who's the one who's lost her son, she's convinced that he's still around, and she's having these like weird like supernatural interactions with him that suggest that he is still there. And so she's digging her heels down and is like, well, I can't give up on him. If he's in trouble, he's not going to last
fighting
forever.
the world to make that claim. Yeah.
And I have to fight the entire world if necessary to hold this position. And Hopper's like, well, I've been down that road, it doesn't work. But we also encounter Elle's mom, is a character just briefly in it, but she's like living with her sister, and she's just assumed to be this like completely insane person.
She's catatonic, yeah.
Catatonic, yeah. That's the word I was looking for. But, Joyce sees that as like potentially her future if like the narrative plays out in the same way. And I think that's an interesting comment about like, millennials are the most recent generations having like, I don't want to say like secrets, but like having like traumas or things that they were going through, and that wasn't really being fully discussed with their parents in their last generation. And so what happened is the parents, if they were like there and present, they just did what like Mike's mom did, is they were just like, well, I can just hug you. You're not really sharing with me, but I'm probably not going to understand it anyways, even if you did, because of the context for what my worldview has been shaped as. The adults in Stranger Things are like, well, this supernatural stuff can't happen. And the younger characters are experiencing it more closely, or they're just more attuned to it being a practical thing. So they have to confront it, and then there becomes that disconnect between the two generations. The interesting thing about Joyce is that she's actually one of the older characters who is experiencing it firsthand. And then she kind of represents that kind of that extreme of this when it just continues, right? When you kind of are trapped within your own fantasies, or when you're trapped with your own traumas or your own guilt, or whatever you want to apply that message to. I'll let you decide. But it's the idea of just kind of being, locked into a certain perspective. And then it goes back to what you're saying, is that community that breaks that up is really important, because Hopper eventually does get very credible evidence to suggest that, okay, well, these government shills are lying, and there's no reason they should be lying unless they're hiding something. So then he starts to piece together what's going on, and he comes back to Joyce and he's like, okay, you were right. There is something supernatural going on. And I was starting to see that for myself when I investigated further. it was so unbelievable that I couldn't get there, but now I'm being forced to confront it once again.
Well, that's okay. So that on that particular point, before you continue, it's also interesting that he's the one that probably was least likely to want to face reality, just because he knows what that's like or what that entails. But he's the one that actually takes the step. He's like, okay, this woman is not giving up. There's a lot of shady stuff going on.
Right.
I'm going to have to go get my hands dirty real quick.
Yep.
And he faces reality, and then he's like, okay, something weird is going on.
Yeah.
So it's another way of showing how his experience or his character is able to get down into the mud if he needs to when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
But because of what he's gone through and because of what he needs to do, especially because he can look at Joyce and see what her future might be, given that he's a stage of her future, and be like, I might be able to prevent that if I'm able.
Yeah.
And so he kind of puts himself through hell to do it.
That's interesting too, because when we look at Hopper, it makes sense to me that he does make that change because he actually does believe in the supernatural a little bit. He doesn't want to, but he can't help himself because he has this scene. It's actually another example I had as a temporary one to examine. So I'm glad you brought this up.
Oh, you're welcome.
So it's the scene where he wakes up and he's got some woman in his bed and, we don't know who it is. So he just kind of brushes her off and he goes outside and he's just standing on his porch or whatever, his balcony. And the shot has just him. And then on the other side is this glowing warm light from the lamp. And then the woman gets up and she goes out to talk with him. And then it cuts to a closer up of the two of them. But you'll notice there's a lot of, like, half this side of the screen is just dedicated to the midnight air. So she kind of represents, because she doesn't get this conversation, what's about to happen. So she represents this internal world, the warmth and acceptance and everything is just like kosher and complete. And he's outside, like, I can't go back into that reality because it's not really reality to me. What's more real to me, what he puts in his own words, is that, do you ever think you're cursed? He starts to feel like he is cursed because he's like, I had something so horrible that happened to me and I don't even know why, and there was no rhyme or reason for it. And so then my life fell apart and I left and I came out here to kind of start over. And then look what happened. Nothing happens in Hawkins for like 60 years. And now suddenly there's like a suicide, a kid getting abducted like out of nowhere. And so he makes this kind of gesture of, okay, well, it's me. I'm a factor in this, right? But just in a small way, it's essentially he's saying like, well, I'm cursed. I'm connected to that. I can't ever have that family and that home life again because there's something dark that's following me around that I can't get rid of, right? So it's just kind of a way because
that scene is encapsulated by the fact that she's like, come back inside and warm me up. And he chooses instead to stay outside.
Yeah, he's like, just give me a
I'm going to stay in the darkness or in the cold.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where he is. And it says that's comforting to him because all that's fake.
Yeah. Well, because it's a fake relationship. He doesn't
That
really
too.
know or doesn't even care.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. But it's such an interesting part of his character. Like I love characters that are stuck in that, like, where they kind of actually believe some supernatural. They won't call it that always necessarily.
Sure.
But you see in their behavior how it measures up for that. And I think it kind of goes in line with just like humanity. There was a guy who made an interesting argument. He was just like, we've not adapted from what our ancestors believed far enough yet. We like to tell ourselves that we're just rational thinking beings now, but we're not. It's like we're still very superstitious.
Sure.
And if you start looking at our behavior, that's what it'll tell you. And I thought that was an interesting, because I feel like it's true on some level. I feel like we do give a lot of credence to that stuff.
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. Well, we won't get into that.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably...
But it does speak to that condition, so on some level, that probably resonates with the vaster audience, which is why this is such a popular show in general.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's because it's supernatural. I'm saying it's because, like, it's such a interesting way to examine a character.
Well, I'm saying his character and the way he deals with these things and how he's kind of has this belief, whether he faces it or not, is something that resonates with a common audience, with a person who probably has the same type of leanings. Yeah. Given your commentary that we are spiritual beings, or that we believe in supernatural things, that's going to resonate with us on some kind of level.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Well, do you have anything further that you would like to throw in? I'm sure we could talk about this show all day, but we are at an hour and 15.
Yeah, no, I think this is a good ending point. So
is.
it's a phenomenal first season.
It is. Highly recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and-
I mean, I'm sure you've already seen it. But
yeah, we didn't even say spoilers, so
I
there's
know.
your spoilers. We're gonna spoil Stranger
I'll make
Things.
sure to put that on the thumbnail or something like, beware.
Well, you know what? I figured we were gonna go we were gonna do a HolmFront style episode where we weren't gonna go through like, I don't want to say spoilers, but it's not like an analysis. I mean, I don't even know what you'd call it, but we sort of unpacked a number of different topics within the Stranger Things storyline, and we used examples within it to prove that or to demonstrate it, but not necessarily to like reveal the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we also didn't synopsize this one, but I also don't think it's necessary for what this is like.
Yeah. Whoops.
I don't think it's necessary because I think our branding really lends to the fact that we just kind of extract what we think makes this artistic.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what merit does this have? And I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah,
Pulling
I
that
feel like
apart.
it was a great episode. So
hopefully you guys
thumbs up.
agree. Like,
they'll
subscribe.
probably be like, "This episode's terrible.
Yeah, this is stupid. What a dumb take.
You misinterpreted it. Now go wash the dishes."
Yep, go wash the ditches. Thanks for watching. So you made it to the end of the video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear what you thought.